Well, welcome everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties there getting started here, but looks like it's a few minutes after 7 o'clock, and so I want to try to get started here as close to on time as we can. Appreciate everyone joining us this evening for the next webinar here in our series. I'm really excited about this one and excited to have Bill Costanzo with us with the Texas A&M Livestock Guardian Dog Program. And if you're at all familiar with their social media page, their website, they've got a ton of awesome resources, fact sheets, videos, and have really enjoyed following along with everything they're doing there in San Angelo and elsewhere in Texas. And so really excited to have Mr. Costanzo here joining us this evening to share a little bit on livestock guardian dog bonding and socialization and training strategies. And it's something that I've learned a lot about this subject over the last few years. Kind of fell into it, and I've had a number of questions on this subject, and so thought it would be good to have an expert share some insight on livestock guardian dogs and how to work with them and how they the benefits they can provide to our flock. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Bill, and again, thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you very much for the invite. Happy to always give a workshop on livestock guardian dogs, and my contact information is up there on the screen. It'll show up again at the end for folks. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help anybody, whether you're, inside Texas or not. Lots of folks need help with guard dogs. So, I'm going to talk to you all about some bonding that we do and how we do that at the center, what we do for socialization, and then, some training strategies that you can use. One thing, kind of before I get started, I'll probably talk about some sizes of our bonding pens and stuff. And so don't like get hung up in the sizes of things. Follow along more with the progression of moving from something small to a little bit bigger to larger, kind of as the dog ages. Some folks like, well, I don't have a pen that's that size. I'm like, well, that doesn't really matter. It's the idea that you progress in size of pens and in the number of animals and things like that, as the dog starts to age. So there's some critical periods kind of in the bonding and training of your livestock guardian dogs. And this is one place where this is where most of our research is focused, and mainly because we feel that that's the place that folks make a lot of mistakes. And so it's really important that you understand that a puppy's brain develops very rapidly from birth to about 16 or 18 weeks old. And the bonding period, we used to think, well, the bonding period started at weaning and went to about 16 weeks of age. From doing some research and talking to some canine behaviorists and kind of what we see at the center with our project that we've had going on, that's really, it starts earlier than that. And so that's why it's important to get a dog from a reputable breeder that has had them exposed, very early on with livestock. And so that bonding window opens at roughly about 5 weeks of age, and I feel it closes off about 14. Some people still think that it's a little bit later. It still is around 16 weeks, but I think if you have the dogs, in direct contact with livestock during that time, if you need to extend it to 16 weeks, there's not a problem with that. But definitely between 5 and 14 weeks, they need to be in a pen directly contacting livestock. After that, from roughly 2 to 6 months of age, you should have them in some small pens, maybe with some older livestock, that will, help teach some submissive behavior to those puppies. Especially getting close to that time of maturity, 6, 8 months of age, you can see some bad behaviors start to show up in some of the dogs. And so, if you've got some older cranky ewes or cranky nannies that won't tolerate that kind of behavior, those are good to, put in the pen at that point. Then from 6 to 10 months, move them into a larger pen or a small trap or, some paddocks or whatever you want to call the pasture areas. How large I would say something 25 to probably 50 acres. And then moving from 10 to 18 months, they're generally large enough at that point, where they can be treated as an adult dog, and you can change feeds and that type of thing, but they need supervision, and that's really when, from probably about 8 to 18 months of age, that's really when you have to give them a lot of supervision. That's when all the bad things that we hear about with guard dogs start to happen. So our bonding pens, we've used a bunch of different types of pens at the center. This was actually one of our road pens when they first started bonding some pups before I started the program that we have now. There we go. So our bonding pens, we're looking at probably the first month to 2 months, so anywhere between 2 and 4 months old. We have pens set up that are roughly about 60 by 60. And inside those pens, we have 4 to 6 animals. Usually we try to have yearling animals for that first, month or two. It's also important that, throughout this whole bonding and training stage, that you're rotating livestock as often as you can. We do it about every 3 weeks. The main reason for that is because you don't want the dogs to bond to specific animals. You want them to bond to a species or multiple species. And so by rotating those animals, the dogs usually don't find or pick on, the weak animal in the bunch, when they're getting rotated that often. And also it just kind of helps keep some fresh animals for them to bond to the species instead of the specific animals. The next few months, roughly 3 to 4 months old to 6 months, we move them into a larger pen at that point. They go into a 1-acre pen. You can add some more animals if you have them. This is definitely a good time to change the ages and have some young animals still with some older animals. If you've got like maybe a couple cull rams or cull billies, this would be a good time to put them in there to help kind of teach that submissive behavior. And again, continue to rotate the stock. If you haven't introduced a feeding station and you're a large enough producer where you need one of those, this is the time when, if you haven't already done it, I would definitely introduce a feeding station for the dogs. We self-feed all of our dogs. We have feeding stations, and I think I might have a picture here coming up in a minute, but it's basically just a small pen, something that's roughly about 4 by 6 by about 4 feet high. And there's a gate of some sort that the dogs go through to get inside and eat out of a self-feeder. The next few months, roughly from about 6 to 10 months of age, again, this is where the dogs go into a larger pen or a small trap. Something, between 25 and 75 acres. Ours are a little bit big. We have our training pastures are about 100 acres, but it's really just because we haven't had the funding for fencing still. And it just, sometimes the dogs don't stay in close enough contact as that I would like to see. But during this time, you can add some more animals. You can go from, doing some of that training kind of stuff to just monitoring the dogs daily and just observing them from a distance. Watch what they're doing. If there's any, bad behavior starting, kind of watch and see what they're doing, and, make some ideas on stopping that behavior. So this is an example of one of our bonding pens. And again, don't necessarily get hung up on what we're doing, just kind of the size and the rotation of pens and things. But over on the left-hand side, we've got 200-acre pastures. That's the kind of the yellow boxes. And then the red boxes are where our bonding pens are. Now, these pens are out in the middle of fields. The dogs don't see anybody unless we're specifically going out there either to feed livestock that might be in these fields, or to bond, train and socialize the pups. And so between the pens, they're roughly about a quarter of a mile apart. And then between the pastures, it's roughly about a half a mile. And so this other picture on the right kind of shows a picture of the pen. I mean, it's nothing special. It's just some pipe posts and woven wire. This one, it's kind of difficult to see, but you can just kind of see this one has insulators. What we've been looking at since we started this project is bonding dogs in electric fencing versus no electric fencing, and then bonding single dogs versus pairs. And so this is one of the treatment pastures or bonding pens. You can see that there's a shelter in here for the livestock and the dog. There's a feeding station that's back here. That also serves as kind of a safe space for our pups. If they are getting bullied, by one of the animals, they can go inside here, but they definitely still have to come outside, to get water. And so it's difficult because of all the brush in the pasture, but kind of just on the other side of this smaller mesquite tree here, there is a fence line that forms that kind of 60 by 60 area. And then the entire thing is a 1 acre in size. So what do we do for socialization? I strongly encourage producers to socialize their dogs. I think it's ridiculous to have to round up all your livestock because you need to take your guard dog in to the vet for some reason, whether it's just annual shots or because they got into a porcupine or they got gored by a feral hog or something. So all of our dogs are well socialized. There's basically kind of three different, ideas that are out there. The first one, was the idea when the dogs originally came over here in the late 70s and early 80s was, completely hands off. You just throw them out in the pasture, they're whelped out in the pasture. They stay out there the whole time unless, somebody's coming to, pull some of those pups off and take them someplace else. That protocol has created a lot of issues, especially like in the mountain states, with a lot of the dogs not being able to be caught and moved and being left behind. And so, that kind of gives a bad image of the sheep and goat industry and agriculture in general because we're leaving guard dogs behind to fend for themselves. The second protocol is our recommended method. We give the dog some regular human contact. It's in a very controlled situation. It's the same amount of time every week. We go through the same training process every time. And so we try to, expose them to a variety of different environmental situations, bringing out herding dogs sometimes, giving them a ride around the pasture in a truck, leash training, tether training, those kind of things. And then the last one, this is again where folks get in some trouble with guard dogs is, continuous human contact all the time throughout the bonding and training period. And it's a very uncontrolled setting. And so sometimes, they'll see people all day long and then they may not see anybody for a day. And then, there's kids that come by and play with the pup. And that creates a dog that's overly socialized and, just ends up sitting on the back porch being a pot licker or, hanging out around the headquarters or something, not really doing their job that they're supposed to be doing. So what do we do for our socialization of the pup? So again, this is a very repeatable process. We do this every single round of dogs, and we've modified it a little bit in between rounds to make sure that we're achieving what we're looking for in the adult dogs. But basically, the pups get some direct socialization. That's about 5 minutes per puppy, 3 to 4 days a week. There's always livestock in the pen. And what we do during that direct socialization time is we do some gentle handling. The younger pups that are, say, 8, 9, 10 weeks old, we'll get a hold of them, kind of gently turn them over, rub our hands all over them. We check their eyes, check their ears. We check their teeth all the way through the training period time. to make sure that they have a good bite, that they don't have any impacted teeth, which is something that can happen. Or a lot of times the puppies like to chew on stuff and they'll get pieces of wood stuck in their mouth, or they'll find all kinds of things out in the field that they get stuck in their mouth sometimes. And then the last thing, we spend a lot of time on their feet. Some of your livestock guardian dog breeds, especially the Great Pyrenees, have double dew claws in the back. And so those nails on those dew claws don't wear down. And so you have to go through and, once a month or at least once a quarter, go through and trim those nails. And so if the dog isn't used to you handling and manipulating their feet, that can be difficult sometimes. So that's why we spend a lot of time on their feet and their mouth. We also leash train and tether train the dogs. The main reason we do the leash training, because it kind of helps with the tether training. And also, if we're out in a large pasture and we need to bring a dog back to the truck because it's injured, or we need to give it shots or whatever, it makes it a lot easier if they can, at least sort of walk on a leash, back to the truck with you, or whatever the vehicle is that you've got out there. And so we start with a couple minutes per puppy twice a week, and we increase that about a minute each week till we get to about 5 minutes, and then we just kind of hold with that amount of leash training throughout the rest of the time that the dogs are in the bonding pens. Tether training starts very similar. It's a couple minutes, per puppy per week. And we gradually increase that time to 15, sometimes 20 minutes, kind of depending on how the dogs are going through the process with the tethering. Two reasons that we tether train dogs, and luckily we have an exclusion here in Texas to be able to tether dogs that are used for agricultural purposes. But we tether train them because, if you're new to guard dogs and this hasn't happened yet, it will at some point. You'll just be getting all the animals headed towards the pens, and they'll be ready to go through the gate, and then the guard dog runs into the middle of the gate and turns all the animals around on you. So if they're used to being tethered, you can avoid that problem ahead of time by catching your guard dog and tying them up next to the trailer or next to the pens to eliminate that issue. It's also saved several of our dogs that have gotten caught in snares when they're out on a cooperating producer's ranch. And so at some point we'll do a formal tethering study, but it does help. The dogs do remember, at least into, the long yearling phase to 2 years old, to not pull a simulated snare if they're caught in one. The last thing we do, and I was just talking to a couple of different producers today about this specific thing, it's important that your dogs get used to riding in a vehicle or riding in a trailer. At some point you're going to have to move them someplace, whether it's just to the vets or, to a new property location because you added another lease property or something. And so it makes life a lot easier for you and the dog if they're used to riding in a vehicle. And so it doesn't take very long. It's about 5 or 10 minutes a week. We just drive them around the pasture. Sometimes once they get a little older, like the pup in the picture, we'll tether them into the back of the truck and drive them around. Or when they're really small, we just usually keep them in the cab with us. So grand total, you're spending, even by the end of this training period, when they're about 6 months old, it's about 20 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week. So it's not a huge amount of time that you have to put in with this socialization. We use kind of a standardized rubric for the amounts of dogs. And so one thing that we were looking at with this amount of socialization is, were the dogs that were socialized more going to end up at ranch headquarters or not? And so we started out with 5 days a week, then we went to 4 to 5, 3 to 4. We dropped down to 3 in round 4 of the dogs, and some of those pups were difficult to catch. And I had to spend a couple hours one time chasing 2 dogs around the pasture, and that was kind of a pain. So in round 5 dogs, we went back to 3 to 4 days a week, and that's what we've been maintaining. And when those dogs are adults, just that extra day, some weeks, makes a big difference in being able to catch those guard dogs when they're out in the field. And so kind of back to the original, thought behind this thing is, did the dogs that were getting socialized 5 days a week end up at the headquarters more? And no, they actually didn't. And so, I think the main thing is that When dogs show up at your back porch or they show up at your ranch headquarters, don't be nice to them. Discipline them, take them back to where they're supposed to be, and then reward them in those areas where you want them to be at. Um, Humans make a lot of the issues that come up with guard dogs because we don't discipline the dogs and properly train them. So, we do a socialization test with the pups. They get a test at 8 months. They get another one at 12 months of age, and then they get the last one at 18 months of age. And so we go back and we check, how are they doing with direct contact? Are they still approachable in the field? Will they come to us? Can we, stick our hand in their mouth and not get bit? Will they leash train? Will they tether train? All those kind of things. And so this slide here just kind of shows you, this is across the first 5 rounds of the project. The purple bars are the 8-month mark, the orange are 12, and then the blue are 18 months. And so then across the bottom is each one of the treatments. So the hot wire set of dogs, non-hot wire, then single versus pairs. And so the bars are very similar, for each round and for each treatment. And I think the main reason, the 12-month mark is so high is because we still have the dogs generally until about 10 months of age. And we're still, even though they're out of the bonding pens, we're catching the dogs, taking them in to get their final shots or to get spayed or neutered. And so they're being tethered, they're being walked on a leash, they're being handled a lot. And so when we go out and test them on the ranches when they're out at 12 months, I think that's why the training is high here, and then it drops off for each one of these. Because by the 18-month mark, producers generally haven't been doing that stuff with the dogs. They're out, running across large pastures and guarding livestock. And so overall scores tend to drop a little bit at the 18-month mark. So kind of moving into training pups. As I mentioned, it doesn't take a whole lot of time, 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 at the most, 3 to 4 times a week, doing those leash training. Some folks like to do, crate or kennel training. If you're a smaller producer and, you like to night pen your livestock, for instance, it might be good to, kennel or crate train your guard dog. Definitely, I would recommend the tether training in case they encounter a snare or you just have to tie them up at some point. And a lot of producers in Texas use M44s at certain times of the year if they've got a difficult coyote to try to remove from the property. And so I don't know if those are going to continue to be around or not, but they do have a pepper spray unit that you can help train your guard dog with. I probably wouldn't recommend it, but some of our producers end up having to do that type of thing because they have such a large ranch, and the dogs may encounter an M44 at some point. The other thing that we try to do is just teach the dog some basic commands. Most of the producers that I work with really don't care whether their guard dog knows how to sit, so we don't train for that. Other people, especially smaller producers, a lot of times do like their dog to know how to sit, and it might be easier if the dog knows how to sit to do some other commands with it. But basically, what we teach the dogs, they all get a name. That's really for record keeping purposes on our end and for the ranchers. And then we teach them to come, to stay where we leave them, and if they're doing something wrong, the word no. That covers probably 90% or 95% of the things that the guard dogs that we put out, will encounter that a rancher needs to give them some sort of basic command for. So hopefully this video plays for you. But basically it's just a way to, teach a pup, and it just shows some kind of cranky ewes that are teaching pups to be submissive. And so you can see this same pup, this is a different ewe, but it's already learned within just 24 hours, to be submissive and to, stay away from the animals, if they're being aggressive towards them. And then this is a different set of pups here. And so sometimes, you do have to intervene and teach the pups to be submissive to livestock. Um, Air horn like that, works fairly well. See if I can get this to go to the next. Um, Air horns like that work really well. If you've got a one of those little 22 short revolvers, for training like bird dogs, have some blanks in it. Those work really well. The one thing I have found on the air horns, if you're going to use one of those, definitely go and get a good one from like a marine or a boat store. The cheap ones that you pick up like at Walmart, they won't keep making the noise when you're pushing down on the button. You'll get one blast out of it, and then you'll have to like wait for it to warm back up again before it'll give you a loud noise. One thing that's important, and this is the reason that we I've been doing the hot wire testing with the dogs, is to make sure that they have a respect for their fence and for their boundaries. And so there was a study done, I think it was back in like 1989, that about 50% of the guard dogs after 6 years were no longer on the ranches, and of that roughly 50%, 60% of those were gone because they were dead. And the main reason for the dogs being dead is because they left their home territories. And so it's important that you teach guard dogs respect early on, for the fence line and for pasture boundaries. So some ways to do that, make sure that your bonding pens are escape proof, that they can't get out of them very easily. Again, have hot wire in the pens. One thing that we've gone to now in the last round of dogs that are out right now, round 6, is we've added invisible fence training. They do have GPS-based systems now that you can put on your guard dogs. We've been testing both the spot-on fence system and the invisible fence brand system, and both of them have worked really well for us. They've got some new software that both the companies have come up with. And while the battery life isn't great, it is lasting about 3.5 days once the dogs are trained to the system. And there is a little bit of work that you have to do to it, but the set of dogs that went out with that system or with that training, while it's a very small sample size of just 3 dogs, so we're a long way from saying it's 100% foolproof. I can say that was the first set of dogs that did not leave their ranches a single time while we were tracking those dogs from 10 to 18 months of age. And as far as I know, they still haven't left, because I did ask those producers that at some point after we were done with the project with them, that if the dogs did leave, if they could let me know. And so that's been, well, let's see, they were on the ranches for 10 months. So we're probably at about 1.5 years at this point. And I'm fairly sure the dogs are, still there on the ranches. So look into an invisible fence system while you're going through and doing that training of your guard dogs. You can also look at a shock collar, although it's not as easy to do, but if you're having some other behavior issues, they do work well, especially for older dogs. And again, like I said earlier, make sure you discipline the pups, no matter whatever it is that they're doing wrong. As soon as you see them doing something wrong, stop what you're doing, discipline them and either take them back to the place that they're supposed to be, or, if they've been chasing or chewing on animals or something like that, apply some discipline and change, what you're doing, so that they don't continue those bad behaviors. So as I kind of already mentioned, I call them the teenage months, and it's roughly from about 8 to 18 months of age. It can start as early as 6 months, and some dogs, depending on kind of the breed, it'll last up to 24 months of age. And so during that time, it's really important that you don't leave teenage dogs unattended with young stock. There's a lot of issues that can happen of like chasing and chewing and biting. And, sometimes the dogs with that kind of rough play, they can end up killing newborn lambs and kids. And then, you'll call me and tell me that, your guard dog is eating your lambs or kids. And so we'll have to go through some corrective measures to deal with that type of thing. But again, a real easy way to deal with young dogs is if you're a large enough producer and you've got several rams or billies, put the dogs in with them. Leave them in there for 2 or 3 weeks. They will help correct a lot of those problems that you're having with that adolescent livestock guardian dog. I know a lot of folks, will go out because they need dogs and they think, well, it's best to buy two. I don't recommend, having two adolescent guard dogs together because what ends up happening is they feed off of each other's bad behavior, and then you've really got a big problem going on. So it's fine to get a pair of dogs, but as soon as they get to that probably about 8-month mark, you need to have some place that you can separate them, a fairly good distance away so that they can't even see each other or hear each other. And then once they're mature, sure, put them back together, if you need to have two dogs in the same area. I mentioned stuff about rough play already. Some other things that'll come up. And this usually happens in the older adolescent dogs, but they'll carry around newborn lambs or kids, and they will be very overly protective of them from, the ewes or nannies. And, there'll be a big commotion going on in the pasture, and, you'll definitely have to go out there and kind of discipline the dogs. There's really not an easy way of correcting that other than, using a shock collar and kind of purposely setting the dog up with a newborn lamb or kid. And as soon as they go over by it, just giving them a shock through the collar. Again, it does help to rotate the stock, so that they don't find weak animals to pick on. And if there is a specific animal that gets chewed on, like this lamb down here that's missing part of an ear, definitely remove those animals. Don't leave them in the training pastures or the bonding pens. Some other things that you can do, the dog in the picture there at the top is wearing a dangle stick. You can also attach what's called a drag to them. There's some different versions of drags, either just chain drags or a tire drag. All those kind of things are designed to slow down, an adolescent dog, and they're not designed or meant to be left on the dog forever. Basically, what we do with those things, like either a dangle stick or a drag or a yoke, if they're digging out, is we put them on the dogs for a month, then we take them off and we see if the behavior's changed. If it has, then we go on about continuing training and having the dogs guard the livestock. If it hasn't, it goes back on for another month again. And, kind of knock on wood, we haven't had to do any of those training aids more than 3 months of time. So they do work, they can be effective, but a 4-year-old guard dog shouldn't still be dragging a tire with it. It is important to know guard dog behavior, and it is different, than other types of dogs that you may have worked with and trained in the past. They're definitely going to, chew on and harass young livestock. They will clean up and eat all the afterbirth, any dead lambs or kids that are out there. They will even, eat on adult ewes or nannies or rams that die out there. And the reason is because they're trying to remove anything that's dead that may bring in scavengers or predators to the area. And so it's just a very instinctual thing. It's not something that, you're going to be able to break the dog from doing. Young dogs do tend to chase deer and other types of wildlife. It seems to be until about the 2.5 year mark that the dogs kind of figure out that, hey, it's okay for those turkeys to be next to my sheep or goats, or for those deer to be there. And then what happens is, producers generally see an increase in that wildlife once the dogs kind of settle down and get used to the property. They will definitely scent mark their territory. You know, they go around. That's one of the way that guard dogs work. They go around on a very regular basis and urinate and defecate in different areas that kind of sets up their territory so that, you know, hopefully other types of canine realize that that's their territory. They are definitely slow to mature. You know, again, they don't fully mature until 18 to 24 months of age. Um, One issue that we run into a lot, just because we're trying to do some different research with like feeding stations and different things with the dogs, uh, they don't like rapid change. And I think that's one of the reasons that they work as well as they do, because any time there is a change in their area, they go to investigate that. And so it can be difficult, you know, if you're changing, for instance, the type of feeder that you're using, a different type of bowl, um, you know, a different feeding station gate, any of those kind of things, you will have to retrain your dogs, you know, to go into that different feeding station or to use that different type of feeder. And it seems like the older that they get, the more difficult that is to do. So, um, you know, if you're going to use a specific type of feeder and feeding station, I would strongly encourage you to do that as a puppy, because, like I said, the older the dogs get, the more difficult it is to train them to do that. A lot of them will dig dens. You know, there's lots of big holes in all of our pastures at the center, from the dogs digging dens, either, you know, by trees or by a water trough to cool off in the summer. So you kind of have to expect that and, you know, kind of watch out for those as you're either driving through or definitely walking through your pasture. The other thing is, you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, guard dogs are the most active at night. Well, I can tell you based on our tracker data anyway, we tracked, I think it was 7 dogs for 18 months at one of our ranches. The ranch was roughly about 5,000 acres, and those dogs traveled between 4 and 12 miles a day with with an average of about 7. And they followed the exact same movement patterns of the livestock. So when the livestock got up in the morning to go out and eat, okay, the dogs were up moving with them. You know, they bedded down during the middle of the day, and then in the later evening or early evening, I should say, you know, livestock were active, the dogs were up and active as well. While you may hear them barking, and they may be active at night, they're most active the same time that your livestock are active. It is really important to keep a positive attitude. Folks can get very frustrated with adolescent guard dogs. You know, I don't know how many ranchers that I've worked with, that were literally ready to shoot their guard dog because, you know, they found it for the third or fourth time, you know, eating a dead lamb or kid. And, you know, they feel like that the dog went out and killed it. And, you know, in the 6 years that I've been doing this, you know, I've had close to 2,000 calls, emails, Facebook messages. Uh, there's really been less than, I think it's 4 times that a producer actually saw a guard dog run and chase down a lamb or kid, grab it, kill it, and eat it. Um, and so you do have to definitely give the dogs the benefit of the doubt, no matter how frustrated that you get with them. Uh, they are just like teenagers, you know, they will be great sometimes, and, you know, sometimes they will screw up and make a mistake. And so you really have to learn how to fix those mistakes and deal with them quickly, because otherwise they get out of hand really quick, really fast. And so, you know, kind of one of my sayings is, like humans, every dog is different, and what works for one may not work for another. So, you know, if you call me and I say, well, you know, use a dangle stick, and that doesn't work, you know, call me back and we can think of something else, or, you know, come up with a different method to try to fix that bad behavior. Um, So some helpful information, and I get this question, so I'll just answer it for y'all now. No, these are not poodles in this picture. These are Commodores if you've never seen them. And so these were 3 dogs that were in our 5th round of the bonding project. And so you can kind of see that one of the breed tendencies for this type of dog is that they form these long, like, kind of dreadlocks in their coats, and you can just kind of see these girls starting to dread up on the back sides of them and kind of through their tails and stuff like that. We do a lot of stuff with GPS trackers. The best ones that I've found to use are the Oyster 3 units. We've started them when they had the first Oyster, and then the Oyster 2, and now the Oyster 3, and I think at some point soon there'll probably be a fourth version of it coming out. But they work really well. They're industrial GPS trackers. You can go out and buy one. They're about $150, and they're about a $10 a month service fee. It's that black unit that's kind of down here towards the bottom. If you're in an area where you don't have cell service, but you do still want a GPS tracker on your dog, I would recommend the Smart 1C unit that's up here at the top. It runs strictly off a satellite. It's a similar cost. It's a little bit more a month. The main drawback to this one is it's a very set reporting time, and you have to have that programmed into the unit before it leaves the distributor. Where the Oyster tracker down here, you can change the settings however often you want it to make a location and report that location and all that kind of stuff. You can do that with this type of a unit. All of the units, or I shouldn't say maybe all, but most companies out there at this point have some sort of a tracker app. And that's what this other picture is down here. Most of them are very similar. They'll use either squares or triangles or circles like this one, and there's usually some different colors. And it'll indicate, like this one with red and green, the dog's moving on the green circles and it's stopped on the red ones. And then the little blue triangles are the direction of travel that it goes in. And so you can pull right up on your cell phone, where the dog is all the time, what it's doing, that type of thing. The last thing that's really helpful when you're, either bonding the dogs or if you have them in some training pastures is getting several game cameras. The newest ones that are out there, if you have cell service in the area, I really like the cellular game cameras. I can pull up on my phone, whenever we're not out there to see what the dogs are doing, if they're getting bullied by animals or if they're, chewing on somebody's leg or their tail or their ear or something, and, which animal they're picking on, that type of thing. They can be really beneficial for training younger guard dogs. And then the last one, this is a system that we've switched over to you. If you're a larger producer and you've got a lot of land, the LoRa system, it was a system developed for the U.S. military, and now it's out in civilian hands. The thing that I like about it is the trackers are cheaper, the monthly service is less, and I get 15-minute updates and locations on all of our dogs. So, if you were here, I could pull up 85 different trackers and tell you where all the sheep and goats are that we have, the cattle, the guard dogs, and where they were within the last 15 minutes. And so it's a really nice system, but you do have to have some sort of a pole or like an old windmill on the property to be able to attach this kind of control box and then a solar panel, or you can get a 110 unit. So they have to be mounted up sort of high, either on top of a hill or like on top of a large barn, something like that, so that the trackers can get the service to them. And then this unit sends the signal to the company. Besides being a little bit cheaper and the frequent updates, the other nice thing about the LoRa system is the battery life. These regular trackers that are a cellular unit, we get, kind of depending on the settings, anywhere from 40 days to probably 120 days. With the LoRa trackers, we can get 4 or 5 months of battery life out of those. So we get constant updates. They're cheaper and a lot longer battery life. And so for us, that's just kind of been the system that we use, at least on our research ranches. I still use the cellular trackers when I'm out with cooperating producers. So that's all I've got, folks. I'm happy to answer questions. All my contact information is up here. All of our social media stuff is all at Tamu Livestock Guard Dog. There's our website address is up there, YouTube channel, all that kind of thing. So I'll turn it over to any questions that anybody has.
Yeah, that was great. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed that presentation. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to, you can unmute yourself and ask them or type them in the chat and we can uh, read them out that way too. So we have a few minutes here, so welcome any questions. There's a question in the chat about tips for dealing with coat mats.
Okay. So the easiest way is prevention. I'll say that. We do have, even though we're here in Texas, we do have Pyrenees mixes or straight Pyrenees or Maremma dogs, on our research ranches. And it really does help if you start with the dog as a puppy. When you're doing that bonding and training, to start to train that hair coat, to kind of slough some of that hair on its own. I have the biggest issues with the Great Pyrenees coat. It seems to mat up the worst. While like Maremmas, at least the ones that we've had, they seem to, and I don't know, it's just something about their hair coat. They shed and lose a lot of that hair on their own. But once you do get a mat, the best thing, and I wish I had one of the de-shedding combs with me right now so I could show you, but uh, they make some de-shedding combs, and you can find them online, and they have kind of like a double curled like blade to them, and a bunch of fingers, and one side will be coarse and the other side will be a little finer. Those type of combs work really well for getting out heavy mats and burrs and stuff like that from your guard dog's coat. Uh, the other thing I would recommend is get the dogs wet. Try to get as much of the dirt and stuff out of their coat as you can ahead of time, and then use a ton of, conditioner. Go down to the dollar store and buy a bunch of cheap human conditioner, or, if you've got horses, some of the mane and tail conditioner, something like that. Work a bunch of that into those mats and try to get as many of the burrs and things like that out. And then before you rinse it, run, a real coarse comb through it. The other thing that I found, and this was just accidental, probably within the last 6 months or so, because I couldn't find my de-shedding comb at home for one of my personal guard dogs, is I grabbed an old school like curry comb for horses. Those work phenomenally well to get out really tangled mats that have all kinds of burrs and stickers and stuff in them from your guard dog's coat if you've worked some of that conditioner in. And so that would be my first recommendation, is to try to do that. If you've done that and you still can't get them out, which does happen sometimes, take either some grooming scissors, or just a pair of clippers, and just clip out that area that is matted. You will need to go through and then comb it out really well, because when you clip their hair coat, it disrupts the natural growth of the hair, and what'll happen is those areas will continue to get matted, and it'll be more severe each time if you don't spend some time working it out and brushing through with some metal combs of some sort. So that's what I would recommend on the grooming stuff. I've got the chat here. Let me see if I can
There's a
find.
question. I think you kind of addressed it with the Pyrenees and clipping a heavy mane. Do you all do any clipping or let it shed out on its own?
We do, and mainly just because it gets so hot here. It is important that you don't clip the entire dog, because they can get a sunburn. And like I said, if you clip the entire body, most likely the next year you're going to have a 100 or 150 pound dog that's going to be one big mat. And so, as far as what we do for clipping, we leave about a half an inch of hair, and we'll clip all from their lower neck down through their chest, the insides of their legs, through their bellies, and, kind of up their side just a little bit. It really makes a big difference for the dogs, and it helps keep them cool. When we have some really humid days or really extremely hot days. Um, but just don't trim the sides or their head or their back or anything like that, or their rump. Um, leave the hair on all that stuff. It does help insulate them. If you keep them well groomed, their hair will trap that early morning cool temperature and hold it throughout the day. If they've got a well groomed coat.
And I think
Let's see
that
here.
question was, do you need to clip around their neck for the shock collars to work effectively?
Oh, for the shock collars. Yes. I do recommend, and it doesn't have to be a lot. And this is one place where, I've some folks have had issues like with the invisible fence training collars and stuff. The shock collars or the invisible fence collars, they're designed to sit right on the dog's throat, and it does need to be fairly snug. I mean, it shouldn't be so tight that it's digging into their skin, but you should have a hard time fitting a finger behind there. And so for that type of a collar, I would take a surgical blade and trim about a 1 or 1.5 inch swatch wide, probably by about 3 inches long, underneath the dog's neck, to make sure that it, definitely has contact with the skin.
Thanks, April, for clarifying that. There's a little bit longer question. The dog is just over 18 months old and is kept in the barn with animals at night, but doesn't spend unsupervised time with them in their pens. Is it too late to hope that he will bond with them if we start integrating him into the pens now?
Okay. I mean, it's probably never too late to start. It's going to be the strength of that bond is, where the issue will come in. You definitely can bond dogs past that, prime kind of brain development time. It's just that it won't be as strong. And I recommend that if you're switching livestock, you're moving from one set of sheep to another set of sheep, or you're going from sheep to goats or vice versa, you know, put a dog in a pen for, 7 to 10 days and try to rebond them to those new animals. Otherwise, what can happen is you can take a dog that's been good with a set of animals that's been staying and stuff, and they can start roaming because they're moving and looking for, the herd that you pulled them from. Um, the sooner that you can get that 18-month-old dog, with the animals full time, probably the better is what I would say.
Another little bit longer question. Also, 18-month-old Marema male, out with ewe lambs all summer at a farm about an hour away from this individual's home place. Never had a problem that he knew of from self-analysis uh, and from the reports from the landowner. Um, and would have been about a year then. From what he understands, probably at that age would have been too young to guard a flock alone, but he did. Recently, he's been plucking wool from sheep at night time and when I'm not there, so can't catch him or to correct the behavior electronically or otherwise. So, a self-rewarding behavior. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a real common problem with, adolescent dogs on wool sheep. And yeah, it definitely is a self-rewarding behavior for them. Uh, what I would do is kind of like what I mentioned earlier. I would purposely set the dog up. I would get a good shock collar, put them into a pen with an animal that they've been pulling wool from. Um, and just walk away. Go stand behind the barn, around the side of it, or next to your truck. Make sure your cell phone's turned off so it doesn't ring. Nobody else is around, and just watch the dog. And as soon as it starts to go over, whether it's actually grabbing the wool and pulling it out or not, as soon as it goes over, even sniff the dog or the ewe or walk by it, zap them on high. You likely won't have to do that training, more than half a dozen times. Guard dogs seem to figure stuff out a lot quicker than some of the other dogs that are out there. They can be very stubborn, but when you scold them and apply some sort of discipline, it seems like they learn fairly quickly what you want them to do and what they shouldn't be doing. So that would be my recommendation to you. Get a good shock collar. We actually use a fairly cheap one at the center, mainly just because at the time I didn't want to spend money on one because we don't have a need very often. But the one that we use is from a company called Inverox. You can get them on Amazon. I think they're like $65 or $70, and it has a really good range to it. Battery life lasts quite a while. It's got multiple adjustments for the tone, for vibrate, for shock. Probably the only thing I don't like about it is, in a situation like this where you need the dog to stop that behavior quickly, and you may need to continue the electronic stimulation. Most of your cheaper shock collars, you have to hit the button over and over and over again. If you just continue to hold it, it will only zap them for like a second or two, and then it's going to stop, even if you're holding the button. Where some of your better collars, like the Tritronic 550 from Garmin, that collar, yeah, it's quite a bit more expensive. It's about, I think, $350. Gundog Supply carries them. That one has a phenomenal range. So if you've got a larger place, it's a good collar for you. But what I like about that one, again, is on the stimulation setting, as long as you hold it, it's going to continue to shock the dog. So you have to kind of decide what's going to work out best for you, and whether you're going to have a long-term investment. If you're going to have guard dogs for a long time, I'd probably buy the more expensive collar. It's probably worth it because you'll probably get some use out of it.
The question about kind of getting started for some small flock owners. What would you recommend purchasing, one guard dog or two? If two, should they get different ages?
Sure. I would say, I guess if you're just starting out, depending whether you have livestock or not already, I would probably start with one dog. You're going to make a bunch of mistakes. I definitely did with my first guard dog, and everybody does. I lucked out personally. Because despite all the things that I did wrong, looking back on it, he was still probably one of the best, or maybe the best guard dog I had. He just ignored all the dumb things that I was trying to get him to do. And he continued to guard the animals. But if you can start with one dog, that's the best. If you really have the need to get two dogs, then yes, I would get them different ages. It's harder to find an older guard dog because the older they get, the more expensive they are, and the less people want to, sell an older dog because they're too hard to get. I have folks looking a lot of times for adult guard dogs because they lost one because it aged out and they forgot to replace it early enough. If you can find an adult guard dog, I would say you're going to probably spend, oh geez, probably at least $2,000, $2,500. If you find one for a lot less, there's a reason. Because nobody gets rid of a good guard dog cheap. Like I said, they're too hard to come by.
So are you using a collar or harness to attach the GPS? I guess just a clarification on that.
Sure. We use a collar on the dogs, and it's a fairly wide. I think it's a 1.5 or 2 inches wide collar. Again, I don't get anything from Gun Dog Supply, but that's where we get all our collars from, and they're fairly cheap. They're good collars. They have them. It's got like a rubber coating on the outside, and it's reinforced with like a nylon mesh in the middle of it. So they're very hard. Like, it takes a lot for a guard dog to chew through them. We've actually never had one completely chewed through by a puppy. But that's what we use, and we just use an industrial heat shrink product to hold the trackers onto them, along with a couple zip ties.
So another individual has a 10-month-old that's great when sharing a fence line with their livestock, but when she's in the field with them, tends to chase and ignore recall. Would this be a good age for a dangle stick or a tire?
Sure. We have some Crockett Chans, and I actually really like the breed a lot. yeah, that dog is definitely in the middle of adolescent behavior, and I guess it kind of depends on your pasture. Like I said, I personally prefer having a drag on a dog. I think they work a little bit better than dangle sticks, but if you've got a bunch of brush or anything that they can get caught up on, the dangle stick is a better option. Um, Oh, there's some pictures on like our website. I've got a fact sheet on dangle sticks and drags, and so you can go on there and download that. It'll show you how to make them, lengths, and things about making sure there's a swivel at each end, stuff like that. But if you do use a tire, the one problem with like a tire drag is, about once a week, you'll have to go out and empty all the dirt out of it because what happens is it gets so heavy that the dog can't move the tire anymore. So, what one thing that you can do, and this was an idea from a producer. I haven't tried it yet because we haven't had the need for a tire drag on a dog in a while, but um, get some of that. I can't think what they call it, but it's that spray foam that you kind of use for like insulation. It comes in like a red can, usually with like a yellow cap. Spray a bunch of that inside the tire and let it fill up, and then it'll keep the dirt from going inside the tire and making the tire really heavy. The other thing too is just make sure you don't have a giant truck tire. Like you want like an ATV tire or like a real small car tire to use because again they just get too heavy for the dogs to pull, but they do work well. They definitely slow them down.
So then another individual is they're entertaining the notion of getting a guard dog. Haven't had one before, and looking for some guidance and suggestions on how to tackle the process, get started, resources, and training for the human, you could say.
Um, oh, well, I mean, one of the problems is, it's difficult to find guard dogs. So we do have a Texas Guard Dog Association, and you can go onto their website. They've got a Facebook group page also that the breeders advertise dogs on. It has like an Anatolian Shepherd and a couple goats on the Facebook group page, but those are definitely reputable breeders. I don't know all of them anymore, but I do know a lot of them, and I do know that if a producer is having an issue with somebody there, if you contact the board, they will help get it fixed, and if not, they will kick that person out of the association. So that's one place that you can go and try to find a guard dog. I think they've got about 120 members in the association right now, all kinds of different breeds and stuff. The other thing, trying to find one, look at breed associations. Most of your guard dog breed associations have a list of breeders. Sometimes it's hard though because those folks want to sell you like a registered dog, and I definitely don't think you need a registered guard dog, so I wouldn't pay that much money for one. I would recommend, however, and I didn't mention this in the video, or in the workshop time, I would try to stick with a straight bred dog, so a purebred dog of some sort. I think a lot of the reason why we have issues with some of the guard dogs is, while we've been crossbreeding livestock and we understand a lot about the livestock and the outcomes of them when they're crossbred, you're not always getting the best of both worlds. And a lot of times, even if it's a two-way or three-way cross, you may not be getting the best of any of them. And I think sometimes you're getting the worst of some of those breeds. And so guard dog breeds definitely do have tendencies. It's not a guarantee, if you're looking for a perimeter dog or you're looking for a close-in dog, if you get a breed that has that tendency, that's how your dog is going to act. But if you do want a close-in dog like a Maremma, for instance, you have a better chance of them being that way by having that straight bred dog. So that is something I would definitely recommend to folks is trying to get a straight bred dog versus a crossbred guard dog. And I'm not saying a guard dog that's crossed with like a border collie or something. Definitely do not do that. That question hasn't come up, and we didn't really deal with that in the workshop tonight. But as soon as you get a guard dog that is bred with another breed that is not a livestock guardian dog breed, you introduce prey drive back into that dog. And that's what we've done for thousands of years, is to try to breed that out of guard dogs so that they're not killing stock and eating lambs and kids like that, when they're 3 or 4 years old. So make sure that whatever the breed is, it's all livestock guardian dog breeds. And if you can, try to get a purebred dog. Doesn't necessarily have to be registered, but try to get a purebred one. Other stuff, because I'm kind of looking at your question here, guidance suggestions. Like I said, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do that. Be careful on Facebook. There are some good pages on Facebook that do offer some really good information about guard dogs. I can't think of any of the names of them off the top of my head right now, but the one, for instance, that suggests keeping your guard dog, in your house for the first year or 2 years is definitely not the one that I would recommend listening to. I get calls from those folks that have listened to those people, and, by 2 years old, if your dog hasn't been out with livestock at all, you probably just have a 150-pound pet at that point. They're probably not going to even, guard your property for you. So, just be wary of your resources. Make sure, the information that you're getting has some sort of scientific research behind it. And, training for the humans. One thing I will say is there's not a lot of people out there, if any, that I know of, that really train livestock guardian dogs. Like you're used to being able to take a hunting dog to a trainer or a border collie to a trainer. Guard dogs generally don't accept training like that. And if you've used them or worked with them at all, you understand that. And a lot of trainers don't, and so they try to get the dogs to do certain things, and then they get frustrated because the dog just looks at you and they go and do what they want to do. And that's really how guard dogs are a lot of times. Well, I said, we try to train them for commands. That's really when they want to listen to those commands. And if they don't want to listen to them, they're probably just not going to do that day for you.
So there's another question. I think you touched on it earlier, but it was a particular manufacturer that you recommend for shock collars. There's some discussion about some different options.
Sure. The Tritronics one is made by Garmin. Like I said, I know Gun Dog Supply has it on their website. There's probably other places you might be able to find that same one. The one that I like, and I know several of the breeders that I work with use them as well. It's the 550 version of that collar. Forget how many yard. I mean, it's got a long range on that collar, and the batteries last pretty well. It's a good collar, but you'll definitely pay for it if you don't want to spend that much because you've only got 1 or 2 guard dogs, and you're not going to be replacing them frequently. The Inverox one is the one that we use at the center when I do need to use it. I use that same one on my border collie, to be honest with you, and it works fairly well for him. He's kind of stubborn and doesn't listen a lot of times, and so he has it on fairly frequently. But those are the 2 that that I've worked with. There might be some other ones out there that work as well too. I just haven't tried them.
So then, have you noticed particular breeds bonding to softer stock like sheep better than others, or does it really come down to the genetics from the parents of any livestock guardian dog breed?
I haven't really noticed anything, like that. As far as, I get the question a lot of times from producers, about like poultry. I think the dogs accept sheep and goats pretty well. They bond to cattle fairly easily as well. It's just, the cattle don't always accept the dogs, and it's more difficult to get a herd of cattle to accept dogs because you're not replacing them as frequently as you're replacing sheep and goats. And so it kind of takes longer, and it's a little bit more difficult because the dogs can get injured with cattle. But as far as poultry, and I've talked to some breeders that have done this a long, long time, 35, 40 years. none of us are really sure whether the dogs actually bond to poultry, for instance, or if they just kind of grow to accept those birds, being in their territory or not. It's definitely a different process that you kind of have to use, and you have to take things a lot slower, because the other thing too is you kind of have to expect that you're going to sacrifice quite a few birds in the training process, if you're trying to bond dogs with poultry. But as far as back to the sheep or goats, I really haven't seen anything breed wise. Um, there are some breeds that are kind of more like dual purpose. I'm kind of thinking of like the Kuvas or Polish Tatcher dogs. They can be a little bit more like property guardian than like livestock guardians, and so sometimes they may not bond to livestock as well, and sometimes that may just be the genetic line of the dogs as well. um, the big thing is that you know they're either born in the field or very close with livestock, and then by about that 5 week age they're exposed full time, through 14 to 16 weeks of age, with those animals. That'll get you a good bond to them, and the dog should stay. Uh, the other thing that's important is, even if you've only got sheep right now, if at some point you think you're going to add cattle or you're going to add goats to the mix, or pigs or whatever the other animals are, I would encourage you to get some of those animals and have them in the bonding pen. Um, it'll make life a lot easier later on if you decide for sure to get some of those animals, because the dog will already be bonded to them and easily accept them, versus if you've got a 3-year-old dog's only been around goats, and then you decide to add some sheep, the dog may or may not bond and to those animals, and it may even be aggressive towards them and keep them separated from the animals it was originally bonded with. So that's one reason why I didn't really mention it in the slideshow. But when we're bonding the dogs to livestock, we have 4 different species. So we'll have hair sheep, wool sheep, meat goats, and Angora goats in the bonding pens. Because even though I normally have producers lined up ahead of time, things happen every year, and I've got to switch where dogs are going to go to somebody that has a different type of animals, and so it just makes your life a lot easier and gives you a better chance of being successful if you bond those dogs to multiple species when they're young.
So there's a question about age for a spaying female livestock guardian
Sure.
dogs.
That's a common question I get as well. We fix all of our dogs at 10 to 11 months of age. um, I know that there's all the research out there online that you can, read up on about weighting on large breed dogs. The problem you have with livestock guardian dogs is, and I see this more and more the longer that I do this. And again, I work with a lot of longtime breeders, and this is information I get from them as well. But guardian dogs do tend to have a very strong breeding instinct, and so if you wait much longer than a year on them, the chances of them starting to roam, which is probably the biggest problem in guard dogs, is roaming. Um, you're increasing that chance of that starting to happen, because that female is going to come into heat and she's going to go looking for a mate. Or if you've got a male dog, they're going to smell a female someplace in heat and they're going to go wander to try to find her. And once they know that they can do that, it's extremely difficult to stop roaming, and sometimes you can't at all. I worked with Oklahoma State for probably 9 or 10 months on several guard dogs that they had, that started roaming, and it was a lot of daily work on their part. And a couple of the dogs we were able to stop. One of them, we decreased the roaming, but the dog was still roaming, and they ended up having to rehome it eventually. So I would say, about the 10-month mark, and that's probably why. If if it seems like your female is maturing rapidly, you might even want to do it a little bit earlier. We have had guard dogs come into heat as early as 8 months of age in our bonding project, but for the most part, if you get them done about 10 or 11 months of age, you should be good.
Awesome. And then one more question here. Does the submissive training approach that you talked about cause them to be further away from the livestock than you intended, than you would like later in life?
No, it doesn't. It just, teaches the dogs to be, to have, just like the hot wire does, teaches them to have respect for the fence line. That submissive behavior training, kind of like you saw in that video, it teaches them to, not run into the herd, or to chase the animals, or to get overly close to newborn lambs or kids. Eventually, the livestock grow to accept the dogs, and um, they'll be a little bit more accepting of, when a ewe or nanny is lambing or kidding, that the dog is, 5 feet away, protecting them. And they will look towards the dog at some point, and follow the dogs wherever they go, because the livestock eventually know that, the dogs are there to protect them. But it does take some time, and you do need a dog that has learned to be submissive to the animals. And so, you know, having some of those old cranky ewes or nannies, or maybe a little bit more aggressive rams or billies to teach the dogs that, it is really helpful during that adolescent time.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that I kept track of in the chat, that I saw there. If there's any last minute questions, now is the opportunity. We'll just give it one more minute here, and then we'll wrap things up. As you're thinking about any maybe last minute questions you might have, I'll just mention that we do have our recordings are posted, and there's a link available on our Small Ruminant Extension page to all of our past webinars. And we have one more webinar coming up in this series that will be exactly a month from today, on March 6th at 7 p.m. And that webinar will focus on pasture management. It should be fairly timely with the green up there in the spring. So hope you can join us for that one. It's been a great series so far. We've certainly enjoyed your presentation this evening, and a great topic and great information, and very, very informative. Lots of positive comments in the chat too. So thank you again. We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us and share this information. And I think some very useful information that we can all use. So thanks again. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, anyone else on the Small Ruminant program team, or Bill provided his contact information as well there on the final slide. And they've got a ton of great resources on their social media and website there with the Texas A&M Livestock Guardian Dog Program. So really encourage you to check out those resources as well. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll see you here in a month for our final webinar.
Hey, thanks everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. So happy to do it again if you need to.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.